Hello, I'm Rob Atherson with Al Jazeera's continuing coverage of the Israel-Iran conflict. Coming up in the next 60 minutes, the Israeli military carries out strikes in and around Tehran as Iran's foreign minister travels to Geneva for crucial talks with his European counterparts. Iran fires more missiles at southern Israel as the conflict enters a second week. The Kremlin warns the Middle East is plunging into an abyss of instability and war. And more than 50 Palestinians are killed in Gaza, many while waiting for food at distribution sites. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas is due to arrive in Geneva to meet his counterparts from the UK, France and Germany, known as the E3. The meeting's to discuss the conflict between Iran and Israel as it moves into its second week. It's the first major diplomatic effort on the issue since hostilities began with Israel's first attacks. Well, ahead of the talks, the Iranian foreign minister told Iranian state TV that Tehran has refused US diplomatic approaches since the missile strikes began.
در شرایط حاضر و در شرایطی که
At the present time, while the Zionist entity's aggression against us continues, we don't wish to engage in dialogue with any party. The United States wants dialogue and has sent several serious messages in this regard, and we've frankly emphasised to them that it's impossible to talk about negotiations while the aggression and assault against our country continues. We're engaged in legitimate defence of our country, and this defence won't stop. There's no dialogue with Washington, which is considered a partner in these crimes. Some countries have contacted us, made proposals and sought mediation, but we've had no contact or communication with Washington, and we'll not engage with them under the current circumstances. Washington asked us to negotiate. We refused.
Well, the talks in Geneva come after US President Donald Trump said he'll decide whether the US will get involved in the Israel-Iran conflict in the next 2 weeks. The White House press secretary has said Trump remains hopeful about talks with Iran. The president said he may or may not join Israel's strikes on Iran and has repeated his call for Tehran's, quote, unconditional surrender. Well, Toher Asadi's in Tehran for us. Noor Odeh is in Amman. She's there because the Israeli government's banned Al Jazeera from operating in Israel and the occupied territories. Milena Veselinovic is standing by for us in Geneva, where those talks are due to get underway. Milena, obviously a lot of press interest in what is going to be happening in Geneva. If Iran isn't willing to hold talks, what are the Europeans hoping to achieve?
Well, they are hoping to achieve, Rob, some sort of a diplomatic headway. I think they consider the fact that Abbas Araghchi is willing to come here to Geneva a very positive step, even though, as we just heard, he did say that Iran can't or won't negotiate while they're still under fire from Israel. However, there is hope by these European nations and their foreign ministers of UK, France and Germany that they could potentially do something today that could stop the escalation of this conflict from widening into the region and make the situation even worse than it is today. Of course, there are major caveats. One thing that's quite important is that the Americans are not at the table here today on Friday in Geneva. However, the UK Foreign Minister, David Lammy, who will be at the talks today, did meet with Marco Rubio, his US counterpart, the US Secretary of State, on Thursday in Washington. He also met with Steve Witkoff, Donald Trump's Middle East envoy. So it is thought that he will be bringing the messages and the views from Washington to the talks here today. Now, we do know that the US and Iran have held multiple rounds of nuclear talks in the last few months. They did not make a lot of headway. There was an impasse over how much Iran could be allowed to enrich uranium. The US side was saying, well, they can't enrich any uranium whatsoever on their own soil. The Iranians were saying that was not acceptable to them. The Americans also wanted to include Iran's ballistic program as part of these talks, and the Iranian side saying, well, that's a completely separate thing. We should not be talking about that. So there were quite significant differences. Now, it is not thought that either of the sides had changed their position significantly. So it is quite doubtful. It does hang in the balance how much progress can actually be made here today on Friday in Geneva.
It's going to be interesting, though, because, I mean, if I remember correctly, France, Germany and the UK were the European signatories to the original 2015 nuclear deal. They also objected, of course, when Donald Trump pulled out of that deal a few years later. How much leverage do you think that gives them with Iran when it comes to talks like this?
Yeah, they were part of those original signatures of the 2015 Iran nuclear deal, a deal that US President Donald Trump pulled out of in 2018. During his first term as president, those countries did try to keep the deal going without the US, but it simply wasn't possible to do that because their financial mechanisms just couldn't engage with the Iranian economy while still respecting the US sanctions. I think just the fact that Abbas Araghchi, the Iranian foreign minister, is willing to meet the foreign ministers of these European countries is significant. There is scope for diplomacy here. There's been that 2-week breather that's been signaled by US President Donald Trump. In terms of leverage, really, what the Europeans can do is act as a bridge between Washington and Iran. And that is why the UK Foreign Minister David Lammy visited Washington on Thursday. And really, the only thing they can do is exert pressure diplomatically on both sides to try to reach some sort of a diplomatic deal.
Milena, thank you very much indeed for breaking that down for us. Milena Veselinovic there in Geneva. Well, the diplomatic talks come as Iran carries out new strikes on southern Israel. Sirens have been sounding in Beersheba and nearby towns. Iran says the attack on a city targeted a technology park housing military and cyber institutions. The Israeli army says an interceptor missile was launched in response. Israeli air attacks have also been carried out across Iran overnight. Missiles hit the outskirts of the northern city of Rasht and explosions lit up the skies over Tehran. We're going to go to Tahir Asadi in the Iranian capital, Tehran. The attacks obviously continuing at the same time as there are efforts at least to try to find some grounds for discussions in Geneva. Just remind us what Iran's position is going into these talks.
Oh, well, actually, we have to take into consideration that this very recent development taking place diplomatically speaking takes place under a context in which Iran continues to see these strikes by the Israeli side. And just a couple of hours ago, we've got this report about explosion taking place in central parts of Tehran. And we've got now unconfirmed reports about the assassination of another nuclear scientist. From the very day one of these strikes, Iran has been witnessing the continuation of these strikes, and military officials, top nuclear scientists, and also very ordinary citizens are getting killed, including women and children. The public mood here is extremely when we speak to people, they are extremely angry about that. But speaking of the very recent important developments taking place on the ground in Geneva, they're facing with a couple of points. First, Iran is trying to send out this message that there is a possibility as far as Tehran is concerned for diplomatic way to settle down the issue. But still, there is this cautious, optimistic cautiousness that we can see, speaking of the statements that we hear from Iranian officials, including Abbas, the foreign minister, who came out ahead of this visit to give an interview to the state TV saying that we are not there for negotiations. We are there as we have been invited by the Europeans, and we are going to listen. So at this point, talks do not seem, at least from Iranian perspective, that much meaningful. If you look at the statements coming from Iranian president, Iranian supreme leader, and other officials, you can see the echo of the same statement that we just heard from the Iranian foreign minister Abbas. They are all saying that as long as Israeli strikes continue, and the reality on the ground is that they continue on now an hourly basis, we're not going there, we're not going to talk, we're not going to get engaged in negotiations, but still, they're trying to send out the message that possibility is still out there. We heard the same thing on an X account by the Iranian president, Masoud Pezeshkian, who came out to say that as long as the Israelis continue their strikes, their aggressions, we're going to strike back, and retaliation is going to be more and more crushing. And speaking of the latest developments, from day one, we are seeing Iranian retaliatory courses of action taken by military forces of the country, and each day we see sort of next step taken by the militaries using more advanced weaponry, more advanced missiles to strike back the Israelis targeting Iranian different territories. And now we have to keep in mind that it's getting to an unprecedented dangerous level with a possibility of U.S. intervention into this already intricate, complicated scenario. And the Iranians on that are very clear. They're saying that if that happens, that runs the risk of a further escalation and a regional war, which is going to take place if that happens.
Tahir Dazadi talking to us there from Tehran. Tahir, thank you very much indeed. Well, Norodeh is joining us now from Amman. Just bring us up to date about that Iranian missile strike in Beersheba, first of all.
It was a very unique missile strike, Rob. One lone missile, the Israeli air defenses did not intercept it. It made impact near a technological park in Beersheba, a major city in the south. We don't know exactly what that building housed, but we do know from the website of the technology park that was impacted that it is adjacent to a campus of the Ben Gurion University and a campus of the Israeli Army's C4I unit, which is the corps responsible for cybersecurity and telecommunications in the Israeli Army and Navy and so on. So there were sensitive sites in that location. Of course, this is heavily monitored and censored by the Israeli Army, but heavy damage was sustained, including to the building housing Microsoft offices.
Talk to us about how Israel is framing its military campaign against Iran to the Israeli people, given the fact that we now know that Donald Trump has said that he is going to delay making a decision about whether or not to get involved for anything up to a couple of weeks.
Well, two things are happening at the same time. On the one hand, you have a narrative to the Israeli public that talks about the free reign that the Israeli Air Force has over the skies of Tehran. You have statements talking about 40, 50, 60 Israeli fighter jets carrying out airstrikes across Tehran and other Iranian cities. So they talk about, Israel's ability to do the job, to do what it takes. You have statements from politicians who say that even if the United States doesn't get involved directly, doesn't strike alongside Israel, targets in Iran, specifically those that Israel cannot target, that Israel would push ahead, although the Israeli Prime Minister has been reluctant to put a timeline on that. And that's important because the longer this takes, the more that this looks like a war of attrition, the more precarious the situation will be for this Israeli government. And in the meantime, you have Israeli politicians, including those in the opposition, including someone like Yoav Gallant, the former Minister of Defense, who certainly does not have favorable opinions of Benjamin Netanyahu, urging Donald Trump to take a decision to actually join the fight. You have billboards in Tel Aviv with Donald Trump's picture saying, Mr. President, finish the job. And in the meantime, of course, a lot of appreciation for 14 more shipments of weapons and munitions that just arrived overnight from the United States, providing Israel with more assistance as it proceeds with this assault.
Norodeh in Amman. No, thank you very much indeed. Fawad Zadi is a professor in the World Studies Department at the University of Tehran. He's joining us from the Iranian capital. Sir, thank you very much indeed for being with us on Al Jazeera. Tahir Dazadi there just earlier on, our correspondent, outlining the fact that despite Abbas Araghchi's determination that there will be no negotiations, nevertheless, he has gone to Geneva to meet the so-called group of E3. How significant is it that he is prepared to make that journey if, on the face of it, it sounds like Iran is not prepared to change its position?
He is saying to these three countries and others who are paying attention that Iran is willing and able to compromise to reach a conclusion of this attack on Iran. Iran, I'm sure, has a message of its own to the other side. Remember, Iran was negotiating in good faith with the United States until the other side decided to attack. As your reporter in Amman just said, Israelis would not be able to engage in this type of attacks on Iran unless the United States helps. They're helping Israeli jets with refueling. This is a joint American-Israeli project. So he's there for talks, not negotiations, because we had the experience of negotiating with the United States until last week, until the negotiators were killed. This is what Trump said. Trump said Israel killed the people I was negotiating with. So this is the plan for now. We have to wait and see what comes out of the talks today. It is actually illegal under international law, under UN Charter 2.4, to use force or threat to get concessions from a country is illegal under international law. If United States wants concessions from Iran, they can go to UN Security Council, pass a resolution, and then if Iran doesn't comply, they can put Iran under Chapter 7, and then they can attack, not before that. So Iran has no other choice but to do what you are seeing.
You mentioned earlier in your answer that Abbas said that Iran was willing to compromise. What format will that compromise take? Because, of course, the sticking point with regard to the nuclear negotiations was that the US was determined that Iran should not be allowed to enrich uranium on its own soil, but it would be allowed to bring in uranium for domestic purposes from another country and have the uranium enriched outside Iran. Is that a compromise that Iran is willing to go to if it means that this conflict will end?
You know, I would say that maybe it was possible to reach a compromise through a consortium or through other mechanisms before Iran was attacked. Now the country is united against United States, against Israel. And even if they were willing to do more on the enrichment issue, I doubted very much for any Iranian politician, whether it is the foreign minister or anybody else, to actually do more after these attacks. It would be a political suicide for politicians to do that. Dr. Araghchi was very quick today to say there were no talks with the United States during the last week. He basically opposed what the White House spokeswoman said. He denied that statement from the White House spokeswoman. For Iranian politicians, they have to also pay attention to public opinion in Iran, and public opinion in Iran is very proud of the missiles that are landing in Tel Aviv.
At the same time, if I understand it correctly, there is an additional pressure, isn't there? Because Donald Trump has now said that he is going to wait for up to a couple of weeks before deciding whether or not the US is going to get involved in this conflict. What's your assessment of the mood within Iran about whether or not it can actually sustain a retaliation against Israel and attacks against Israel for that period of time?
You know, Iran experienced an imposed war, another imposed one from 1980 until 1988. It was Saddam Hussein, with the help of United States, with the help of all Western countries and some Arab countries. And it was 8 years. It took 8 years, and people in Iran sustained that level of aggression for 8 years. There is this culture of resistance in Iran. So even people who oppose the government for different reasons realize that the reformist government of Dr. Pezeshkian really wanted to have an agreement. They were negotiating in good faith. And this is disrespect of Iran when you treat Iran in this manner in the middle of negotiations. You attack the country. No one really likes that. So the government, if they want to resist these pressures that you mentioned, they have quite good public support if they want to do that.
On that basis, I just want to bring up some pictures we're seeing at the moment coming out of Tehran. There are large crowds which apparently are taking to the streets to demonstrate Now, I'm not entirely clear what they are demonstrating for, but perhaps you might be able to give us an indication from what you may have seen in Tehran with regard to these crowds gathering and the mood of the crowds. It does seem to be happening in several, I think, several different locations within the city.
Today is Friday. As you know, in Muslim countries, people hold Friday prayers. Iran has about 1,000 cities, so this is just in Tehran, but in 999 other cities, you're seeing the same demonstrations, and you can see in the pictures that they're holding the country's leader more than before. Why? Because Trump threatened to kill Iran's leader. Israeli defense minister did the same thing. So as I was telling you, there is this sense of unity in the country. There is this rally around the flag effect. You see a lot of Iranian flags. People are rallying around it. And if Netanyahu thought that by attacking Iran, he would have regime change, he needs to fire Iran specialists in Mossad and hire new ones, because this is backfiring on Israel and the United States.
We have had some analysts over the last 2 or 3 days on that subject, suggesting that whilst it is very common for a country which is being threatened by another country, attacked by another country, to have the people of that country rally around, as you say, to use your phrase, rally round the flag. Nevertheless, it was only a few years ago, of course, there were massive demonstrations against the regime inside Iran. Do you think that there is an argument for saying that what we're seeing now is our protests and demonstrations as a result of a feeling of nationalism, but these are not necessarily representative of support for the regime?
You know, this is natural for human beings. When they're attacked, they respond. If people in UK are attacked, if France attacks UK, then people in UK will unite against the foreign attack. When Trump was saying that Canada is the 51st state of the United States, Canadians united against Trump. This is just part of human nature, and Iranians are as human as other people. And with regard to the riots a few years ago that you mentioned, the leaders, some of the leaders of these riots published a statement opposing the Israeli attack. They said that we have a lot of difficulties with the Iranian government, but this attack was unprovoked. It came during negotiations with Iran. So we had very few people, opposition leaders outside Iran, that actually were quiet. Everybody was opposing, and there were a few people that were quiet. The late Shah's son, for example, asked for people to do uprising. You know, his father came to power through a 1953 U.S. coup, and he wants to come to Iran as king through an Israeli attack. That's not going to happen. He basically finished his political future by supporting the Israeli attack on Iran. The Iranians that matter, the people who are living here, not outside, some of them are at the demonstrations and others may be at home, but they are not going to accept their country to be attacked in this manner. It's official now. The Israeli defense minister yesterday said that they want regime change in Iran. And when you're so blunt about the designs that you have in Iran, it's going to backfire. In fact, a lot of Iranians think that they want to turn Iran into another Libya. They're looking at territorial integrity of Iran. There are people in Israel that think if they take the oil-rich parts of Iran out, balkanize Iran, then they can sort of finish Iran off. And, you know, people don't like to be finished off. People don't like to see their country attacked. And this is what you see. People are opposing this aggression in the best way that they know. They're going to burn American flags. They're going to burn Israeli flags. They're going to shout against Americans and Israelis. So Netanyahu, on the second day of attacks, had a message for the Iranian people. He asked Iranian peoples to come to the streets and demonstrate. And they did, today demonstrating against him.
Fadizadeh is Professor in World Studies at the University of Tehran, so we appreciate it. Thank you very much indeed. Russia is one of many countries closely watching events unfold in Iran. The two cooperate in many areas, and they've got a shared experience of being extensively sanctioned by the West. Rory Challenge looks at their partnership and what options Moscow has during this conflict.
For Ukrainians, there is no more deadly symbol of Russia and Iran's relationship than the drones flying at their cities. Russia makes them now, but earlier in the war it imported Iran's Shahed 136 and smaller 131 by the thousands. Just one facet of a strategic Russia-Iran partnership that takes in defence, energy and geopolitics.
It's about common strategic interests. I think that Russia was looking for an in the Middle East to rebuild its influence. Syria was a convenient foothold. Iran was a dominant power there. So Iran served as something of a force multiplier for the Russians in the Middle East as long as Syria was under Assad's rule. The Iranian and Russian economies are both battered by sanctions, so they need to find trade partners that don't use the US dollar.
When Russia and Iran signed their strategic partnership treaty in January, it formalised a relationship that's been deepening for years. The two have long cooperated on energy, with Russia helping build Iran's Bushehr nuclear power plant and working together to sidestep US sanctions on their oil and gas sectors. They've also shared military drills, most recently in March, with Russian, Iranian and Chinese navies exercising together in the Gulf of Oman. But with Iran now under sustained and unprecedented attack from Israel, eyes are on Vladimir Putin to see if he'll help. The strategic partnership does not include any mutual defence commitments, and Russia's military capacity to help Tehran isn't what it used to be.
Russia will by no circumstances get involved directly in this war for two reasons. First one, that's not the war which directly touches upon Russian interest. Indirectly, yes, but directly not. But the more important reason is that Russia has a very clear priority. And as long as this priority is in force, Ukrainian conflict and Ukrainian campaign, Russia has no capacity to get involved in any other military actions.
Speaking to journalists in St. Petersburg, Putin suggested Iran was on its own.
Once we offered our Iranian friends to work together on air defence systems. They didn't show much interest then, and that's it. Speaking about the Strategic Partnership Treaty, which you mentioned, it doesn't include any clause about defence. That's number 2. And the third point, our Iranian friends didn't ask us about this, so there is nothing to discuss.
But memories of the fall of Syria's Bashar al-Assad are still fresh in Moscow. It's where Assad now lives in exile. If Tehran topples, Moscow will have lost another important ally in the Middle East, undeniably a blow. But Vladimir Putin has direct lines to Israel, Iran and the Trump White House. Either as an interlocutor or just by biding his time, Putin could yet turn this crisis to Russia's benefit. Rory Challenge, Al Jazeera.
Vyacheslav Matusov is a former Russian diplomat. He's joining us from Moscow. So thank you very much indeed for being with us on Al Jazeera. As we were just hearing there in Rory Challenge's report, a lot of very deep links between Russia and Iran. What does Russia fear most out of this conflict?
We should remember that Iran is a big neighbor country and very developed in technologically, military, and so Russia has a desire to have its neighbor, it is frontiers in the south, friendly situation in Iran, in Middle East, in Turkey, and because it is better that all frontiers of Russia from the west, from the south, are inflamed by war. For example, Ukraine, Russia is really in fight, military confrontation with not with Ukrainian, but with the Western countries. About 62 countries of the West are confronting Russia in Ukraine as a proxy. It is the Ukrainian army. Iran is, as it's said by Carlson, during the meeting with the senator of the United States lately, he called that population of Iran is 92 million person. So it is a very important neighbor. And we cannot ignore their situation in this region. That is absolutely clear.
Let me ask you about forgive me for interrupting you, sir, but let me ask you about questions the point that Benjamin Netanyahu was making early on in this, when these attacks began, saying that one of the potentials of these attacks could be regime change in Iran as a separate issue, essentially, from the impact on Iran's nuclear program and the risks that you were talking about with regard to Iran's relations with other neighboring countries. What are Russia's concerns in the event that these attacks do lead to regime change in Iran?
Any attempts from Israel, from the United States, from the European countries to change regime in other countries because they dislike it, it is not acceptable from a Russian point of view, because Russia agreed on the point of Islamic Revolution in 1979. Russia, being a communist state, a socialist country with confrontation with the United States, and the Warsaw's treaty was confronting the Western country. Russia acknowledged Iran and Iranian revolution, and being absolutely different position on ideological scene. So I think that any attempts to change regime, to kill a leader of the independent state, member of the United Nations organization, I think it is absolutely unacceptable for any point of view, from international law, from United States position, and from Russian Federation as a neighbor country. So I think that demand of Israel to kill spiritual leader of Iran, Khamenei, killing leader, it is not acceptable from any point of view.
Vyacheslav Matsutov, please forgive me, sir. I'm kind of conscious of the time we have, but I'm very grateful to you for being with us on Al Jazeera, sir. Thank you very much indeed. Still ahead on Al Jazeera, business comes to a near standstill on the border between Iran and Pakistan. We're going to show you how the Israel-Iran war is hitting people's lives there.
It's got really hot in the southwest of Spain, particularly Andalusia. Seville was about 42 yesterday, and this heat is moving slowly northwards. In fact, that's the general trend across almost all of Europe. It's getting hotter and hotter. This is the exception. Still, Scandinavian down to the Baltic states, where that wraparound front is bringing temporarily cooler air. 14 degrees and raining on Friday, and that rain as it comes south will allow the temperature to rise to some degree. That's a progression, and you'll notice the temperatures have risen quite nicely, at least west of Ukraine. There are showers breaking out, possibly thunderstorms in the southeast of Spain or southeast of France or over Spain itself. But otherwise, we look at temperatures. And let's look at Paris's temperature. The record for Paris in June is 37.6. The forecast for Sunday is 37. That is so close. Clearly, it is very hot. And there's a warning out as a result. Hardly a surprise that. In North Africa, we're more interested not in the temperatures, but in the rains. And they're showing up. This is a clump of thunderstorms, and it's coming through in the Sahel now. So you get them coming from the Ethiopian highlands, moving westwards through Mali towards Guinea-Bissau and Senegal. Admittedly, most are near the coast, but many have made some good progress inland.
The warrior dancers of Dingep Aranado Debo honor their queen with a victory dance. A woman is the highest authority in this community. Surrounded by her subjects, the woman king presides over a land dispute.
I lead a peaceful community with no trouble because of my gender.
To ascend the Nyagon throne, a woman must be above 50 years old. The queen serves at the pleasure of the paramount ruler of Ganye, who also administers many small chiefdoms like hers.
For more than 260 years, no man has led this community, and there is no indication that a man will ever return to power here.
But the men here aren't bothered about being ruled by a woman.
We enjoy her ruling very serious.
Women leadership has strengthened the position of women in this community. Unlike some of their neighbors, they have a voice in matters that affect not only them, but the entire community.
You're watching Al Jazeera. Reminder of our top stories this hour. Cleanup operations underway in southern Israel after Iran fired a barrage of missiles. An apartment building in the town of Beersheba was heavily damaged. Iran says the attack targeted a technology park with military installations. Iran's foreign minister Abbas says his country is not prepared to sit down for talks with anyone while Israel continues its attacks. He made the comments on state TV ahead of a meeting with European foreign ministers in Geneva. And French President Emmanuel Macron has been discussing the situation that's been going on between Israel and Iran.
Depuis plusieurs jours, la France a une voix claire.
First of all, for the past few days, France has been clear. Nothing justifies attacks on energy infrastructure and the civilian population. Nothing. And second, we need to prioritise returning to negotiations. That includes reaching a deal on no nuclear enrichment and no ballistics to limit Iran's military strength, and an end to Iran's funding of terror groups that have been destabilising the region.
Luciana Zachara is an associate professor of Gulf politics here at Qatar University. And Gideon Levy is a columnist for Haaretz. He's joining us from Tel Aviv. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for being with us. Luciana, I want to start with you first of all. Let's talk about this delay that Donald Trump has worked into what's going on at the moment. What do you think he's trying to achieve by suggesting that a decision on whether or not the US is going to take part could be delayed by anything up to about 2 weeks?
Well, I think he's trying to gain time, to see what is going on. He's decided to leave Israel to do the dirty job, to see how far Israel can reach in terms of weakening the Iranian regime. And I assume that these 2 weeks is the time frame he's giving himself to decide whether engaging in something that is going to maybe force a regime change or not. I don't think this will be the last outcome, but maybe this is the way that Trump is thinking in order to follow up what Netanyahu is doing. The way Netanyahu is naming and labeling his operation that is against the regime, is not against the people, the way that is calling the racing lion is referring to pre-revolutionary narrative, how the Shah, the son of the Shah, of the last Shah, is referring to the attack of Israel like targeting the regime and not the people. It's all driving to this idea that maybe with this can a regime change happen in Iran. So I assume that Trump, that is not interested in the beginning to do that, is not interested in invading Iran to have another Iraq or another Afghanistan, is saying, okay, but if this happened because of Israel, I will give time to this to happen. If it's not happening, maybe I will enter into the battle or not, depending on that. But I don't think Trump made his mind about engaging or not yet.
Gideon Levy, let's talk about this two-week delay, because Benjamin Netanyahu at the start of the attacks in Iran was determined that Israel was in the position to be able to carry this on for a significant length of time. Nevertheless, analysts we've been talking to have been saying, no, actually, they really need the US to get involved in this quickly in order to be able to preserve some of their military capabilities. How do you think the Netanyahu coalition is reacting to Donald Trump's suggestion that he's going to wait for a couple of weeks?
I guess it is deep disappointment. They wouldn't say a word because they are very, very careful not to say something wrong, because with Donald Trump, you can't say something wrong. So they are very careful. They don't express anything. But for sure, they are deeply disappointed, because 2 weeks is endless in this reality. And if he really meant 2 weeks, and it's not a deception, then, you know, the chances that they will get involved, that the Americans will get involved in this war, are decreasing and decreasing. But time will show. Meanwhile, Israel will continue, and hoping that in a certain stage Donald Trump will join.
Luciano, let's talk about the talks that are going on in Geneva at the moment. Well, there are going to be discussions, but not talks, because we have to be clear. Abbas, the Iranian foreign minister, has made it quite clear he's not there to discuss or debate anything. He's just there to listen. Nevertheless, it is significant, isn't it, that he is actually making the journey to Geneva to listen to these three countries who were originally the European signatories to the joint plan, the joint nuclear plan. What kind of leverage do you think that gives those European countries in this?
Not that much. I think that the Europeans are trying to still to protect something of what they were able to achieve in 2015. They have the last options to use these snapback mechanisms to push Iran to do something different. It's expiring in October, so the European countries, they gave themselves a deadline in August, mid-August, to decide whether they will implement this mechanism or not, because then will not be able to do it. This gives a very short time leverage on the European countries to do something. But what they can do, what they can achieve, or what they are aiming at, I think the only thing that they can aim at right now is to convince Iran to de-escalate a little bit and to sit down again with the United States to negotiate something, which is something that Araghchi said they will never do under fire. So as far as Trump is not also pushing Israel to stop the offensive against Iran, this conversation will never happen. But with these 2 weeks, he decided to give himself to decide. Is telling Israel, okay, do as much as you can, and then I will decide in 2 weeks whether I can enter or not in the conversation.
Gideon, Benjamin Netanyahu has always portrayed himself as the defender of Israel's security. If, with or without the US, Israel was able to for want of a better phrase, decapitate Iran's nuclear program and destroy its missile defenses, would Israelis actually feel any safer?
Maybe for the short run. I'm sure that for the short run. But for the long run, nothing will be solved, because Iran can regain its capability. And meanwhile, Israel is surrounded with so many other problems which are forgotten now, but will not go away. Gaza is not going away. The occupation is not going away. The apartheid is not going away. And all those are the biggest dangers for Israel. So maybe they will really succeed, which is still to be proven, to neutralize the capability of Iran, the nuclear capability. This will be welcomed by all Israelis, I'm sure. But to tell you that this will be the end of wars, the end of terror, the end of violence, the end of resistance to the occupation, forget about it.
Luciano, critics of Benjamin Netanyahu have for years claimed that, or suggested that he's pursued ongoing conflict in order primarily to bolster his own position within Israel as Prime Minister. I mean, how much do domestic politics, do you think, play into the decisions that are being made now?
Well, difficult to see now what he's thinking about, but I mean, I always said that Netanyahu has been in power for 30 years and he knows perfectly how to deal with the opposition, with supporters, how to deal with very controversial situations affecting himself. So I don't think he's too worried about his continuation in politics and continuing being in the prime minister or at the top of the decision-making mechanism in Israel. But I assume that what he's trying to prove himself is that everything he has been saying since 1990s about Iran is true. He's trying to convince his own population that he's doing this because of a greater good for Israel, which is eliminating once and for all of the Iranian threat that is coming from the nuclear program, but from the Islamic Republic itself. So he's trying to achieve this big goal. But as Gideon said, this is not ending the other problems. I mean, now Israel is killing more Palestinians in Gaza than ever before, and nobody's talking about that. And this is not going, I mean, destroying the Islamic Republic will not solve that. We will still see this problem ongoing. And now the attention is deviated towards that, toward the threat that Iran may represent or not to the Israel safety. But what is going on with there? Nobody's talking about ceasefire, nobody's talking about humanitarian aid, nobody's talking about anything else. And this is the more concerning thing. Right,
Luciano Zachara, Gideon Levy, gentlemen, we appreciate it as always. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Well, the conflict between Iran and Israel is severely disrupting cross-border trade between Pakistan and Iran. Pakistan is Iran's fifth largest export destination. It imports more than $2 billion worth of Iranian oil each year. Kamal Haider reports from Quetta in the province of Balochistan.
At this major fruit and vegetable market in Hazarganji, Quetta, these workers are busy loading grapes, peaches and apricots destined for markets around the country. It is also the first port of call for fresh produce imported from Iran. And Pakistan also exports its famous mangoes that are in high demand at this time of the year. But this local trader says trade has come to a halt.
The conflict between Iran and Israel has brought our trade to a standstill. I couldn't import or export anything this week. Even a container of mangoes, which is in high demand in Iran, was turned back at the border. It's a heavy blow to our business and livelihood.
Imports of liquefied natural gas, or LNG, from Iran have been badly affected.
The border closure with Iran has halted our LNG transport, directly impacting our income. We don't know how long this will last, but if it continues, truckers like us will suffer greatly.
Balochistan is also the main gateway to Iranian petrol and diesel smuggled into the country from Iran. But those supplies are also being hit. In Balochistan province, the livelihoods of millions of people living along its 900-kilometer border with Iran depend on fuel smuggled in from the country. Hostilities between Israel and Iran have cut off most supplies, keeping them struggling to keep going. Unable to afford fuel sold in formal markets, many here rely on places such as these to save money. Like many others, Nematullah is dependent on selling fuel smuggled in from Iran. That's cheaper. But the conflict is also biting his business.
My livelihood depends on selling low-cost Iranian fuel, often priced at less than half of the legal rate. But with supply disrupted, it's now scarce. Many, including myself, have shut down operations. This crisis has left us devastated.
Many consumers are finding it hard to fuel their vehicles.
Life was already tough, and the conflict in Iran has made it even harder. I can't even find petrol for my motorbike, and prices here have also doubled.
Almost $1 billion worth of petrol and diesel is estimated to enter Pakistan illegally across the border with Iran each year. It accounts for 14% of Pakistan's annual fuel consumption. As the war takes a heavy toll on the people in Iran, it's also affecting others across its borders. Kamal Haider, Al Jazeera, Quetta, Balochistan.
Let's go live to Kamal Haider, who's in the Pakistani city of Quetta. Kamal, obviously, it's clear from that report there that you gave us that the links between Pakistan and Iran are very, very deep on so many different levels. Is there any suggestion that Pakistan is trying any diplomatic efforts to get involved or find a solution to what's going on, or is it having to just essentially wait to see how things play out?
Well, first of all, just recently, the Pakistani military chief met with the U.S. President Donald Trump. They, of course, talked about, most probably, about Iran. That is what is being reported here. Of course, Pakistan would like to stay out of this conflict because Pakistan has strategic worries as well, given the fact that the Narendra Modi regime in India has very close links with Netanyahu. In fact, in the recent escalation between India and Pakistan, Israeli drones and Israeli help was used against Pakistan. So Pakistan will be watching very cautiously as to what is really happening. Any victory for the Israeli military war against Iran would not go down well here. Pakistan has deep suspicions about that. The Foreign Office has already condemned the strikes, unprovoked strikes, and expressed its indignation, particularly over the attacks on the nuclear installations. So there are implications for Pakistan, and Pakistan obviously will be trying to see if it can play a role in trying to defuse the situation. But the ball right now is in Netanyahu's court. It is seen here, at least in Pakistan, as to whether Israel will stop that fighting, because until that fighting stops, Pakistan will be watching this very carefully.
Kamal Haider there talking to us from the Pakistani city of Quetta. Kamal, thank you. At least 50 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli forces in Gaza on Friday morning. Most were waiting for food parcels near the Netzarim corridor. On Thursday, 16 Palestinian aid seekers were killed in this same area. The attacks took place at a distribution point run by the US and Israeli-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. The organization took over aid operations in May after Israel blocked all UN agencies from delivering food. Well, Hani Mahmoud is joining us live from Gaza City. All eyes are on Israel and Iran. Nevertheless, of course, Israel's attacks on Gaza continue. Hani.
Absolutely, and it seems to be that the Israeli military is taking advantage of the distraction created in Iran by the ongoing trading of fire, exchanging of fire between Iran and Israel, and continues to carry out deadly attacks. It's not just about food, people seeking aid or food parcels at the distribution center. They're being deliberately targeted and gunned down by the Israeli military. There is a significant rise in the drone attacks, and we're talking about the span of 24 hours. We're counting close to 12 drone strikes, and just in the past couple hours, 2 of these drone strikes targeted more tents here, charging points for phones and electrical devices. Another one targeted a crowd of people in the eastern part of Gaza City. Meanwhile, in the morning and earlier, airstrike, a deadly one, killed 8 members from one family. So the Palestinians are now dying at a record number due to the ongoing attacks. Once again, one would have imagined that Palestinians will experience some sort of respite in the past couple of days since the tension escalated between Iran and Israel. But on the ground, contrary to all of this, there is an average of 70 to 100 Palestinians killed on a daily basis, either waiting at distribution centers, or they are inside their tents, or carrying or taking their phones or laptop to charge it in one of these charging points set up in multiple of these tents across the Gaza Strip. And the reason these tents are everywhere is because there is no electricity. For 20 months now, it has gone dark and the power grid was completely destroyed, and people rely on alternative. A lucky person will have one solar panel to able to generate electricity to charge phone or laptops.
Hani, we appreciate you and the team bringing us up to date with that. That's Hani Mahmoud joining us from Gaza City there. Well, the number of refugees who fled Sudan has passed 4 million since the war began there 3 years ago. Tens of thousands of people have crossed into Chad in the past month, fleeing attacks in Darfur by the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces. The UN's Refugee Agency says the crisis has reached breaking point and food supplies are running out. Ahmed Idris reports from Adre on the border between the two countries.
The Iridimi refugee camp is a new humanitarian corridor for tens of thousands fleeing the fighting in Sudan's North Darfur. The United Nations Refugee Agency say that from late May to early June, an average of 1,000 people crossed into eastern Chad every day. It's where Musa Mansour Isa hopes to find peace.
We spent 3 days in the bush evading the rebels. There's no one left. It's hell on earth.
He's unaware that hundreds of thousands of his compatriots who arrived here 2 years ago are still struggling. Khadija Hassan queues for supplies for herself, an elderly mother, and 6 children.
The food we receive for a month would last only a few days. We must either find other means or starve.
As funding dwindles, the situation worsens for her and countless other refugees in Chad.
We are not in capacity to continue to face to all these people arriving with the funding situation. This response plan is funded only at 13%.
Since the outbreak of hostilities between the Sudanese army and the paramilitary rapid support forces more than 2 years ago, around 1 million Sudanese have sought refuge in Chad, worsening the country's already dire food shortages.
The food insecurity in Chad is at one of its highest level in the last 10 years. There's 3.3 million Chadians in the next 3 months that will experience acute forms of food insecurity.
Aid agencies collectively characterize the conflict in Sudan as the worst humanitarian crisis globally. One official refers to the displaced as forgotten. For the 1 million Sudanese refugees here in Chad, food is a major concern, and what shelter and water supplies are available are also inadequate. Half the refugee population here is housed in emergency shelters. Only 25% of school-age children here who arrive here have access to education, and United Nations officials say there is only one doctor to every 80,000 refugees. The refugee population in Adre, for instance, is 4 times larger than the local population, leading to competition for limited resources. Aid agencies express fear that a lack of funding could escalate tensions between local communities and refugees. Ahmed Idris, Al Jazeera, Adre, on the Chad-Sudan border.
I'll give you an update now on the main developments in the Israel-Iran conflict. A clean-up operation is underway in southern Israel after Iran fired a barrage of missiles. An apartment building in the town of Beersheba was heavily damaged. Iran says the attack targeted a technology park with military installations. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas says his country is not prepared to sit down for talks with anyone while Israel continues its attacks. He made the comments on state TV ahead of a meeting with European foreign ministers in Geneva. And before we go, I want to give you some latest pictures from Tehran. Thousands of people have taken to the streets of the Iranian capital in protest against a week of Israeli strikes on the country. Cyril's going to be here in a couple of minutes with more on all these stories. Stay with us.